ARIA is an independent research body that was set up by the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology. Although it is sponsored by that government department, it has complete autonomy over its project choices.
With SRM, we can't conduct a controlled experiment. We don't have two planets, one on which we conduct SRM and one on which we don't. There is no planet B to test this on. Once deployed, we're effectively launching a planetary experiment with no ability to reverse if things go wrong.
I receive communication on a regular basis from constituents asking me about my opinion on the UK government's involvement in chemtrails and geoengineering. Can I seek the Minister's assurances that chemtrails are actually condensation trails and nothing to do with solar radiation management? And as far as SRM is concerned, the UK government has not deployed the techniques and has no plans to do so.
On the chemtrails, supposed chemtrails issue, it is a term that's used by some people who claim that it's the white trails that you see trailing behind high-altitude aircraft on a clear day. There were some that concerned that they contain undisclosed chemical agents that are intended for a covert atmospheric spraying programme. They are, in fact, as the Honourable Member says, contrails, which form when warm and moist aircraft exhaust fumes mix with cold air at altitude. Under certain atmospheric conditions, contrails can persist and spread out to form cirrus-like clouds before disappearing. There is no deliberate spraying of chemicals in our skies over the UK for climate modification.
Commissioners have highlighted, even if SRM works, in quotes, in the short term, there's a risk that our climate would become dependent on continual injections. If the injections stop for any reason, which in our turbulent geopolitical world is entirely possible, we would risk a phenomenon known as termination shock, a sudden extreme spike in global temperatures, which would be potentially catastrophic for life on Earth. As to the actual chemicals being used in SRM, the aerosols under consideration include sulfates and even aluminium. This is still being researched, and there is no definitive link between aluminium and conditions like Alzheimer's, but many scientists remain cautious about prolonged exposure. And sulfates are precisely the chemicals we worked so hard to eliminate under the Montreal Protocol because of their role in depleting the ozone layer. We should consider carefully that deploying SRM could put us in direct violation of that protocol, one of the most successful international environmental agreements ever forged. And we must consider the human cost of climate change and any measures that we might take to mitigate it. Who decides the thermostat setting? Who gets more rain and who goes without? Can we even control these things? The risks of failing to invest in technology to tackle the root causes of climate change threaten serious regional disruption. And as always, it will almost certainly be the poorest and the least responsible for the crisis who bear the brunt of the fallout.
My party's position on SRM is clear. We oppose any attempts to seed the sky, and every effort must be made to be respectful of nature and our planet. Chasing harebrained scientific schemes such as these to interfere with the climate and the atmosphere will not give us answers to any live public policy dilemmas. The Met Office has confirmed that we don't have enough evidence to understand how effective geoengineering like SRM might be, and we don't know what unintended consequences might occur for human and environmental health. I know ministers have said that there are no plans to fund experimentation with solar radiation modification, but public concern was prompted by ARIA offering £56.8 million of public money to examine climate cooling theory. It's important to say that this research does not, as far as I'm aware, include any actual attempts to manipulate the climate in practice, but was a study in relation to the theory of these methods.
So I'm now turned to solar radiation modification, which I think is the real, although the petition refers to geoengineering in a broader sense, I think this is what the petition is possibly the reason it's attracted so many signatures. As I mentioned, SRM describes a set of technologies that could cool the Earth largely by reflecting some of the sun's energy back into space. The consequences of SRM are currently poorly understood, with significant uncertainty around the possible risks and impacts of deployment. So let me be clear and place on the record, the government is not deploying solar radiation modification and has no plans to do so. There will be no spraying of chemicals in the skies over the UK for SRM, geoengineering or climate remediation. Our priority is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from human activities and to adapt to the unavoidable impacts of climate change. But we do think that we need to understand the potential risks and impacts of SRM. We may have a very clear commitment not to deploy it, but we need to understand what would happen if other people chose to do so. And that includes engaging with the Met Office Hadley Centre Climate Programme, the Natural Environment Research Council and the Advanced Research and Invention Agency, ARIA, whose climate cooling research programme, I think, the coverage of that has triggered some of the concerns that we're here to talk about today. ARIA is an independent research body that was set up by the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology. Although it is sponsored by that government department, it has complete autonomy over its project choices. And I think that goes to the point that was said about whether this is the best use of public money. ARIA is responsible for its own choices. ARIA is conducting cautious, controlled research aimed at improving understanding of SRM risks and impacts. It's not deploying SRM technologies. I will repeat, however, this research will not release any toxic materials, nor will it alleviate the urgent need for increased decarbonisation efforts. There is no substitute for decarbonisation, and that is why we are pressing on with our missions for clean power and net zero. So to conclude, the science is clear. Without rapid action, we risk irreversible damage to the planet's biosphere. To halt global warming, the world needs to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions, and that includes the UK's emissions. I hope that I've reassured honourable members present today and the constituents they represent that the government is not deploying SRM technologies and has no plans to do so, and that the environmental impacts of greenhouse gas removal technologies in the other sense, in terms of being the other wing of geoengineering, are being and will continue to be monitored as these technologies scale up in the UK. Making Britain a clean energy superpower is one of the 5 missions of this government, delivering clean power by 2030 and accelerating to net zero across the economy by 2050. And I note the comments by the Honourable Member of South Cambridgeshire about the UK being off track to do that. We will be publishing our carbon budget delivery plan by October, and that is something that, as she said, the previous government was taken to court for failing to come up with adequate policies to match the ambition, and obviously there's no point setting targets unless you can deliver on those targets, and we will be setting out a plan in due course, as well as then going on to talk about Carbon Budget 7 and meeting our nationally determined contributions as well. We must do everything we can to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That is absolutely our starting point, that we need that effort share across all government departments, and we need everyone to play a role.